Nafasafin, my voice is a precious jewel that I offer in every song of my being. A life force in the palm of my hand that ignites the fire of light and hope, dissolving obstacles in my inner process of self-realization and opening the doors to new possibilities. The sixth dimension itself is that which allows you to create realities in your center. They are the architects, the creators of worlds. The seventh dimension is the moment of greatest enlightenment because the alchemist, this being that has managed to experience itself, is now able to transform its own reality and, therefore, the seventh dimension is what's called enlightenment of being, where spirit, soul, and body, sound, right, and form are integrated into a single being and from there radiate into creation. In other words, they themselves become their own creator. The eighth dimension of time represents all cycles of all beings together. In other words, if we could see the eighth dimension, we would see a kind of toroid, an apple that is woven into different realities and different spaces and times, unifying them in the center. The eighth dimension of time represents all the cycles of all beings together. I have lived and experienced throughout different lives. See, there's been millions of beings who have done exactly the same in parallel to me. The eighth dimension is the infinite that allows the being to connect with all the others. In other words, to observe the experience of all the other realities and unite them into just one. The ninth dimension is the maximum being, the initial being. That's why, again, it becomes one. 1, 7, and 9 are the center dimensions. And that center is the ninth dimension of time. It is the center point where we find divinity. Not God or someone external, but oneself as the creator, oneself as the whole. Once the 9 dimensions of being collapsed in on themselves, the same divine being or the same universal being transcends itself to another level of consciousness and another level of consciousness and keeps multiplying like cells in a kind of mitosis. The great mitosis of the universal being begins to create another divinity, based on itself. This being begins to create different patterns and therefore another being with different times and spaces. In itself, the whole initial process only presents itself in the levels of consciousness, then on an emotional level, and then on a physical level. That's why the universe is mind, it is spirit, and once the spirit recognizes itself, it moves to an emotional level, in other words, the soul. The soul is itself, the being that will be loaded with information on the whole spiritual process. The spirit understands itself from all possible visions, and the soul allows it to generate the energy, the vehicle, to be able to feel that which it knows.